right, baby. I got an oldie for you. Gonna knock you right on the floor with all the DNR revisionism, baby.
1, 2, 3 a real, 4 a real DNR. 5, 6, 7 a real, 8 a real DNR. 9, 10, 11 a real, 12 a real DNR. We're gonna tear apart the film tonight. Put your glasses on and join me, hun. We'll see no grain when this master's done. We're gonna DNR around the reels tonight. We're gonna DNR till there's no grain left. We're gonna DNR around the reels tonight. When the DNR strikes reels 2 through 4, if the engine is slowed down, we'll yell for more. We're gonna DNR around the reels tonight. We're gonna DNR till there's no grain left. We're gonna DNR around the reels tonight. When the digital changes ring 5 through 7, we'll be right in the 7th version. We're gonna DNR around the reels tonight. We're gonna DNR till there's no grain left. We're gonna DNR around the reels tonight. When it's 8, 9, 10, 11, 2, I'll be destroying films and so will you. We're gonna DNR around the reels tonight. We're gonna DNR till there's no grain left. We're gonna DNR this film absolutely to death.
Hey, what do you say? American Graffiti finally got a new Lucas-approved transfer. You guys gonna have a little bash before you leave?
Hey, the forums have been looking for you all day, man. Aw, great.
What do you got? Wow, 4K UHD, 2 discs, and slipcover.
Lucasfilm says they're all very proud of you. Star Wars, I think we better have a talk. Listen. I don't think I'm gonna get that archival transfer.
What? Come on, what are you talking about?
I don't know. I was thinking I might wait for a year, sneak out by a boutique label.
You chicken fink. Wait, let me explain. You can't back out now. After all we went through to get untouched releases. We're finally getting out of this turkey revisionism, and now you want to crawl back into your cell. We're leaving for another rights holder in the morning, okay?
You want to end up like James Cameron films? You can't be modernized forever. I just want some time to think. What's the rush? I'll get a proper archival release someday. You sound like THX1138. Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. This is a review of the monstrosity and the desecration of American Graffiti, and I'm not overstating it. George Lucas has finally decided to go and muck around with American Graffiti and has done his darndest, it seems, in this new 4K master to tear apart the film and really try to strip away a lot of its unique atmosphere, and has succeeded in doing so. This is a desecration of a classic film, and of course now the circle is now complete. All Lucasfilm titles have been royally screwed over for all time. To paraphrase a line from Star Wars, of course. American Graffiti was the one film that had thankfully escaped the crazy revisionism of the other Lucasfilm titles, the Star Wars original trilogy, and the desecration of THX1138, which cannot be seen in its original form whatsoever in terms of the 1971 theatrical release version, and the better 1978 reissue version where Lucas got to put back the film the way he wanted it in terms of fighting back against studio interference in the theatrical cut. After the release of Star Wars, he was able to do this with both THX and American Graffiti and fix the edits back to where they were originally, and in the case of Graffiti, he also did a Dolby Stereo remix, which has carried over to most of the physical media releases over all these years. But the 1978 reissue cut of THX1138 is really the proper version of the film, but neither it or the 1971 original theatrical version can be seen. All you can see is the 2004 George Lucas director's cut, which is the title officially, Abomination of THX, which has been completely manipulated in every way, shape, and form in both picture, sound, color grading, digital effects, the works, just as the Star Wars original trilogy has. And quite frankly, since THX was a very low-budget Techniscope production and one of the most visionary science fiction films ever made, just like Star Wars, it's arguably an even worse presentation than what's been done to the Star Wars original trilogy. So you can only see the 1978 version of THX on the Warner Letterbox Laserdisc or Pan and Scan VHS tape, and that's how the film is stuck due to the insane desire of some people to revise anything that's humanly possible, even when it's not supposed to be possible. As long as there's something in your digital toolbox, well, why should that stop you? Well, American Graffiti has
been the one that's kind of gotten overlooked or just not paid much attention to, and thank goodness for that for the longest time. Unfortunately, that means it's been stuck in a variety of really craptastic old masters that are not up to snuff, and really the only major work that's been done on it, first in 1998, we got the Signature Collection Laserdisc with a new master and a new documentary and extras, and this formed the bulk of all of the other releases, or they were merely updating this signature master. So this, of course, has the 1978 stereo remix in terms of it being a matrix stereo track, and that's why all of the DVDs and Blu-ray, which was an HD bump of this old master, that's why they all still have a 2.0 matrix track. It doesn't sound as good as it should. It's been EQ'd and messed with a little bit and had some noise reduction applied, because we can have nice things like untouched theatrical audio tracks. By and large, everything from the Signature Collection Laserdisc up through the DVD and then the eventual Blu-ray have been, relatively solid, but obviously dated older masters with a lot of the quirks and problems of other universal masters at that time period. The only major change that was done at this point in, 1998 or so for this Signature Collection master first released on the Laserdisc was the changing of the opening title shot, which was changed to a new CGI digital sunset to make it look, I guess, spiffier or supposedly match better with later footage, but it really doesn't, and it sticks out like a sore thumb, and it's been a bone of contention for a lot of fans for a lot of years, and most people then want to, argue, well, why are you only talking, it's just one shot, it doesn't matter all that much. It's like, well, yes, but, it doesn't bode well for the future, and, we've had to live with, okay, at least, it's just the opening shot, and, he didn't mess with anything else. So the film has been stuck in this outdated form. The Blu-ray is not really good at all, but it's at least passable and serviceable, but it has a lot of issues of its own because it's an older Universal disc and it's a Lucasfilm title, the one that they didn't really pay much attention to for a lot of time. So it's got all kinds of problems from, of course, some DNR usage. It's got noise in the transfer. It's got edge enhancement. It's obviously a dated older master. When the disc came out, it was already an obviously dated and older master, so it was not up to snuff then. It's certainly not now, but, at least there hadn't been anything else done to it. Of course, what we all really want to see is an archival presentation that really lets the film's incredible atmosphere come to light in the best possible quality that we've never seen on home video before. That would also mean giving us the original theatrical mono mix. Now, American Graffiti is equally important in terms of its audio as it is the incredible visuals and the style. The film was a bit of a breakthrough in a technical sense, even though it was an extremely low-budget production. And the low-budget limitations combined with Lucas's real preference for a documentary type style and the documentary approach of the film lent itself to these constraints. I'll get into this a little bit more when I'm talking about the technical aspects of the film and what's been done to it on this master. But in any case, the one thing we've never gotten and what the film has truly always needed is a proper archival presentation of the original theatrical release and the original theatrical mono mix, which again was a sound breakthrough due to the sonic wizardry of Walter Murch, who also worked on THX 1138 and produced a beautiful mono mix that has been also similarly destroyed. Before going any further, I do have to talk a little bit about the production and how American Graffiti was made, and this really factors into why the film is so special and why it has a timeless quality and really plays into its overall effectiveness, what generates the atmosphere. The film was made on an extremely low budget. No studio wanted to make it. Universal finally agreed to produce it on a shoestring, and of course this was in the sort of period of the collapse of American zoetrope after the complete failure of THX 1138, and of course Lucas really reeling from that, and then Coppola having to go and make The Godfather to even have enough money to get out of potential bankruptcy. And Coppola did attach his name as producer on Graffiti just to get the film greenlit and to give it that name recognition, because otherwise nobody really wanted to make it even for a shoestring. The film was shot on location in small California towns on an extremely limited budget, using primarily unknown at the time actors and really using natural locations without any freestanding sets. This is very much much done in a documentary style. You can't really make it more documentary style if you tried. It is basically shot exactly as if it was a documentary, and Lucas had a long background in documentaries, and this plays into his own visual sensibility. So really, American Graffiti is perhaps a thesis film of what he and others and Coppola were working on in terms of the ideals of American zoetrope, but it's also George Lucas getting back to his film school days and all the various bits of documentary short films and things he was doing, and what fascinated him about visuals and also sort of studying human behavior from a distance. So you can look at Graffiti and it has all of the highlights and aspects and various core themes that you see in all of the cinematic work of George Lucas, both his student films, documentary work, and of course the feature films. And this is even in Star Wars, even though most people have never quite looked at it that way. It's even there. There's a natural growth from THX to Graffiti to Star Wars, and they're of course linked by the fact they were all made in the 1970s, and also by the fact that George Lucas has tried to strip out as much of that 1970s production as humanly possible, and has gone even further than what is humanly possible due to the new toys in the digital toolbox. Now, American Graffiti was shot at night on location and also utilized the Techniscope process. This was primarily because the film was extremely low budget, and Techniscope was always advertised as the poor man's cinemascope. It was developed primarily to be used in Europe, but it really took off in Italy, and the whole way Techniscope worked and what made it cost so much less is that you took a normal 35mm piece of film essentially and split the difference in the frame. So what would be a normal 4x frame in terms of the frame having 4 perforations of space on either side to have a normal sized frame. Well, basically what was done when the negative was shot is that negative was only using half of the frame, so only 2 perforations of area of actual film per frame. And by basically cutting this frame in half, you naturally have something that's pretty much approximating a scope frame, and you're able to thus get a scope image and not have to use anamorphic lenses and have anamorphic distortion and things. So you can use spherical lenses, have a lot sharper photography, get a lot closer to your actors and performers, which of course would make it perfect for a documentary if you wanted a scope ratio. But it also meant that you paid half the cost in the actual film stock and the processing, because you're only using half the film stock because you're only using half the frame. So that, of course, lends to the atmosphere of the film. But it also means it's grainy as heck, and you're also limiting your overall resolution, although they weren't thinking about words like that in the analog realm. It does mean, though, that you are naturally limiting the overall quality of your image, and you also had to rely on optical processes and lab work to actually convert your Techniscope negative into a standard 4 perforation 35mm print. And some labs did this better than others. Some prints came out not looking very good at all, and also because it was an actual optical process that had to be done, that meant you also had generational and quality loss. So that furthered the sort of dirty image and also furthered the graininess of the image. So Techniscope had a particular style to it. It really lends itself to having this grungier, more documentary, almost cinema verite feel. And the best films found ways to utilize the Techniscope formats to its fullest. The real mastermind of Techniscope was, of course, Sergio Leone, who famously photographed his iconic Westerns in Techniscope, and it was being able to use spherical lenses that allowed him to get these incredible close-ups, which he couldn't have done using anamorphic. He would have had to do it differently and could never have gotten that striking of a visual. So Leone really elevated Techniscope to an art form. Other films in the 60s and 70s would as well. I would also argue the Ipcress file is one of the all-time great Techniscope films. And also, I'd say even Lucas's own THX 1138, which you can no longer see properly in its original form, and you'll never apparently be able to see it in its original splendor because people don't care about historical preservation, although they'll allow themselves to be quoted about the importance of film preservation all day long and pay for restorations and all kinds of things like that. But, but altering the historical record is nothing new within the Lucasfilm Company, and is probably the greatest problem with the Lucasfilm Company that has ever been, and that's something that for some reason Lucas Lucas himself likes to do. Why exactly, I don't know. But ultimately, what this means is any scan or presentation of American Graffiti will be grainy as hell because the film was shot on Techniscope on a low budget. Plus, it was a night shoot, which was incredibly difficult to do. And Lucas's original plans were so difficult to pull off. He had to wind up calling in Haskell Wexler to basically take over the photography of the film because the documentary cameraman he had couldn't really achieve what he wanted, and it was quite bold and daring to even try to pull this off on an on-location, low-budget, entirely night shoot that's supposed to be simulating a single night in 1962 in Techniscope. And I can certainly tell you one thing, if Haskell Wexler was here with us today, he would be through the roof if he saw this transfer, and we would have another situation as when Owen Roizman saw the first Blu-ray of The French Connection and blew up, and William Friedkin had to back down, and Roizman was able to come in and supervise the second corrected transfer release of The French Connection after the horrible Friedkin experiment of the first Blu-ray. That's the level of how badly the film has been manipulated here, and it no longer looks like itself. It really does not. Because in this new 4K master done supposedly for the 50th anniversary, I guess George finally thought it was time to go back and screw with graffiti, which had not really been done before this point. The entire film has been degrained within an inch of its life, essentially. It is now just horrifyingly terrible looking. Everything is flat and mushy, and there's next to no detail, and you can tell that this is a newer master in scan because it was there originally before somebody went in and took it all out. And if that wasn't enough, you will see stuff that's floating around all the time. But what you're seeing is not film grain. What you're seeing is the traces of whatever tools were used to remove every bit of film grain. And they didn't care about leaving artifacts behind and different things like that. So this is a bizarre appearance. All of the life and the vitality of this incredible film has been sucked out of it visually. The visuals are now flat and dull, and there's no fine detail whatsoever. And they didn't even take the time to do a full cleanup pass, because when you watch this transfer, you'll notice every once in a while there's a little tiny speck or two that pops up. So they went to town on grain removal, but then there's, one or two artifacts that still pop up. So that was bizarre to see. But you also see all kinds of artifacts throughout the whole transfer of all of this insane processing they did, which in some ways starts to almost be a sort of digital noise pattern instead of a grain pattern. And it's just appalling looking at this, because a good chunk of the effectiveness and what made graffiti so memorable is the incredible time capsule sense of the film and the low-budget night location photography done on a shoestring budget, just like it would have been if it was a documentary. And the fact that it was shot in Techniscope only enhanced all of this. Even the cast and crew talk in the vintage documentary, which is ported over on these discs, about the genius move of utilizing the Techniscope format and what that did for the film's visuals and the style and making you feel as if you were there and really giving you that documentary experience and flavor.
And the film was shot in Techniscope, which is just one step up from 16 millimeter as far as negative size. It was sort of the poor man's anamorphic.
It's widescreen, but it uses only half of the 35 millimeter frame, so the effect is all the grain and desaturation of 16 millimeter. So in a way, it has this kind of documentary 16 millimeter look, yet the widescreen scope and frame, and so it was a really inspired decision and a great way to go.
That's all gone now. It is completely gone. It's heartbreaking to see. It really is. Anyone who knows film or American Graffiti, or has ever seen an original print of American Graffiti, which is a rare experience, unfortunately. But anyone who knows film, especially someone who knows Techniscope, will look at this transfer for 2 seconds and just break down in tears. It is that bad. It is that ungodly. And this is pretty much the definition of the desecration of a film in a visual sense. If that wasn't enough, however, they've also seemingly done a new color timing pass making additional tweaks over the already not so great home video masters, and it seems like it's been desaturated.
George did tell me he wanted the film to look like a jukebox. Strong colors. Nowadays, a lot of films we try to desaturate and have pastel colors, but this was certainly some picture that George was correct in the visual thing that he wanted in graffiti.
Every single aspect of the color timing is dulled and reduced and desaturated, and this even starts to play into the actual depth of individual shots and the lighting and the black levels. And then you have to look at how the HDR is handled. Because this is universal, this is an HDR10 disc, there is no Dolby Vision, and nothing Dolby Vision could do could even try to polish this ungodly turd. That's what this is. That's the best way to describe it. But thankfully, the HDR10 here is not overdone. There's no crazy pop-out moments or anything because the nit usage isn't super high. But also, the HDR doesn't really do much of anything here because the film has already been so badly desecrated visually that what you're left with is a flat, gross, dull image that has no life whatsoever in it. And worst of all, this is going to make people today who have never seen the film think that the film has always looked like this. And people will then think that Techniscope is terrible. And they'll just think the old adage of, oh, Techniscope is like 16 millimeter. Well, that's not exactly true. And when done right, Techniscope is an art form. And the original presentation of this film was an artistic triumph. That's why the film became so iconic for its visuals, because it was made like a documentary, and it's something you can't recapture, and it's something that you've never been allowed to see properly on home video, and you're never going to see it in this master because it's been stripped away. All of this is visible to the naked eye. Anyone who pops this disc in will be horrified. And in terms of the DNR application and the visual desecration of a film in the modern 4K realm, this is the worst presentation since T2. That's without question. And really even more so because American Graffiti's visuals were so important to the spirit of this film and the low-budget shoot. Everything worked in synergy to make this film what it was. It's one of a kind. It's something that you can never quite recapture, and now somebody has gone in all these years later and, apparently done a new scan, because you can tell it's a newer scan, and they just tore it apart. I mean, they really did. There's all the life of the visuals have been stripped away and just eradicated. That would be one thing, but this being a Lucasfilm title, people couldn't resist going in and making more changes and tweaks. Thankfully, these are more on the minor side, but you start to notice one or two things here and there not looking so right. We, of course, have the opening title shot that was changed all the way back in 1998, but now there are little tweaks all over, and they're on the level of having to go through frame by frame and comparing this to older versions. However, people didn't really seem to care about covering up any of this stuff or making them look seamless or anything, because there are several you'll spot that they've already made the rounds online and on Twitter and different things. But, they're visible to the naked eye. The big one is in the first night shot of Mel's Drive-In. The entire sign has been redone digitally, and they didn't even bother to make it match the rest of the building. But then as the first major car drives by, the sign is visible through the roof because they didn't worry about fixing the digital mat or anything. So that's a big glaring visual problem that's very noticeable at the start of the film. And people have found there are other little things here and there, like crew removals and car reflections and things. So this is one of those transfers you have to go through on a frame-by-frame basis, just like Star Wars and THX and Empire and Jedi and Raiders and Temple of Doom and Last Crusade. Any Lucasfilm title, of course, we're used to doing this and looking for tweaks and versions. And before you know it, you find another one 6 months later when you weren't even looking for it. And you're like, why the hell would they do that? Well, this has now happened to Graffiti. It's just not on the super obvious in-your-face level all the time as, say, the 4th special edition of Star Wars. Yes, there are 4 different special editions of the original Star Wars trilogy now. You can't make this stuff up. People can't leave things alone. To summarize, The new master was a new scan of the 1978 reissue cut of the film, so we still to this day have never gotten the original 1973 theatrical release edit of the film on physical media at all, and that does need to be preserved, even though the little bits of footage were removed against Lucas's wishes by the studio, so it's understandable why the 1978 cut became the standard version, because that was the original cut of the film, but still, for posterity, the 1973 theatrical version should be released as well as an option. So that's one issue. Issue number 2 is the film has been DNR'd to hell and back and is, I think, the worst case of digital noise reduction on a 4K master since Terminator 2. And quite frankly, on an artistic level, is even worse, because this is one of those films where the grain is the film. I mean, this is like the textbook case. The other one would perhaps be Eyes Wide Shut, where the grain is the film, and that film has never been presented on home video properly. I have been lucky enough to see a dye transfer IB Tech release print of American Graffiti, and it's absolutely staggering. It's an incredible, beautiful experience, and that's the only way you can properly experience this classic, is to see somehow an original 1973 IB Technicolor print that was properly made back in the day is in projectable shape with the original mono mix. That is a work of art. That is a work of beauty. That's the timeless film that became one of the best and highest profit margin films of all time, and immediately became an American classic when it was made, and one of the masterpieces directed by George Lucas. That's American Graffiti, not this thing. So keep that in mind. So that's another thing. And then you have the new round of digital changes and tweaks all over the place. And then you have the new color grading, which desaturates the entire film. So there is nothing to look at in this transfer. There is nothing to enjoy in this transfer in terms of the picture quality. There is no picture quality. If you can't tell, this really gets me hot and bothered, because it's one thing for studios and rights holders to go in and do this stuff, but for somebody to go in and desecrate a film this much, where the production really was a giant chunk of what made the film so atmospheric, and the atmosphere of the film was the heart of the film. I mean, this is really something else. This is somebody going in and trying to basically change the format of which a film was made 50 years on. This was not shot digitally last year. This is not something that you can go in and sit there and tweak to death, because it was made 50 years ago on a shoestring budget, on location, at night, with blood, sweat, and tears, and on Techniscope, which was a very finicky format to work with, but a very unique format that could result in some amazing visuals with an intensive grain pattern that could just really create atmosphere like nothing else. Beautifully made Techniscope films are one of a kind. There's nothing else quite like them. And American Graffiti is one of the most beautiful Techniscope films ever made. And the Techniscope visuals are part of the heart and soul of this film, and that has been ripped away and just destroyed now. So when you're looking at this 4K master, you're not really looking at American Graffiti. You're looking at the latest and worst, just recycled, regurgitated, whatever the heck we could throw at it version of American Graffiti. It is a shadow of its former self, and is so poor that even a grindhouse scan of an old print, even if it was faded to crap, if it wasn't dye transfer, and it was just an old faded to complete pink print with vinegar syndrome out the wazoo, that would still be American Graffiti, and that would still be a better experience than this piece of junk. And if that wasn't bad enough, this comes bundled with the old Blu-ray, which is the old master, and is really showing its age, and looks really terrible as a Blu-ray, but guess what? In every way, shape, or form, in spite of the DNR and in spite of the edge enhancement and all the terrible problems of this old master, if you switch over to this Blu-ray after putting in this UHD, it is a relief. It is so much better, it's not even funny. And the fact that this old piece of junk Blu-ray master, which is really just an upgrade of the 1998 Signature Collection Laserdisc master, is better than the 50th anniversary 4K master, I mean, that's just what are we even doing here? So don't even bother putting in this piece of junk. Just put in the old Blu-ray and, in spite of all the old Universal crud and it's an old master and it looks like crud, guess what? At least it still will upscale to 4K and is at least watchable and does not make you want to scream and just cry at how a film has been destroyed visually. So yes, in every way, shape, or form, this super old HD master on the Blu-ray, in spite of all its problems, is better in every single way than the UHD. It even has more visible detail, and guess what? It has even more film grain in it, even though it's mixed in with digital noise and edge enhancement, all kinds of other crud. And the color levels aren't a problem. They're not perfect. It's an old master with a lot of screwy problems, but the color isn't desaturated. The black levels aren't a major problem. So visually, it's better than the 4K master in every single way. And it doesn't have the new round of digital changes applied to it. All it has is the tweaked opening shot, and like all versions of the film, the closing text was changed for the 1978 reissue. So that's been on all physical media copies, and that would be something that would have to be restored with the original 1973 theatrical edit of the film, which of course had a different ending text credit. So if you were wondering if you needed to upgrade to the UHD, if you have the Blu-ray, don't. Just don't. And then we move into sound, which is just as bad as the picture, actually. Here we have a 5.1 track, which is a brand new remix done for this release. Thankfully, it didn't go further into 7.1 or Atmos, so it's another sign of Lucasfilm titles getting new modernized tweaks, but especially in audio, they're not up to the modern codec anyway in terms of the latest and greatest, because Lucasfilm gave up on keeping up with technical standards a long time ago. You can't tell. This is a lifetime's worth of frustration, can you? Now, American Graffiti is iconic for its sound just as much as the visuals, because of course this was really a breakthrough in terms of it being the first major film to be comprised entirely of popular songs of the era and also having it intermixed into the actual individual scenes. And Walter Murch in his sound design coined the term of worldizing the sound, of trying to make it feel as if it was a world of sound that the characters were inhabiting. So the music tracks are loud and soft, and they're in cars and they're on car radios, and as we're in this city at night going all around for an extended 8 to 12 hours, the sound is just as active as the visuals. And so this was all done in a single channel mono mix and was a breakthrough in terms of sound design at the time, because, at this point, sound design was not even a coined term, and that was really Walter Murch, who was the first credited major sound designer. This was what he was actually doing long before anyone or he himself got the credit for it, and American Graffiti was a major breakthrough in this. It is one of the great single channel mono mixes, and you can hear that. So this really does link Graffiti to the other film that did this in 1973, and why they're one of the great double features when paired together, because Martin Scorsese would also do this in Mean Streets, which of course also famously has an entire library of songs of the era that play as a sort of character's jukebox throughout the film, and also has a degree of this sort of worldizing of sound by placing the iconic songs within the context of the actual scenes and playing around with the levels and balance and things, but to nowhere near the degree that Walter Murch did, because they didn't actually do that on Mean Streets in terms of to the incredible levels that Murch did. And I don't think they were necessarily trying to do that in words. I've never seen that in print anywhere or anything, but there is some degree of that there. And also the film was made on a shoestring budget. So that's why Graffiti and Mean Streets are so closely linked, and they came out in the same year. But Graffiti's sound design is, again, it's a major breakthrough in film sound, and it should be studied in terms of college courses or just the history of film sound. So to not have that landmark breakthrough soundtrack available for study is a major problem. However, in 1978, they did remix the film into Dolby Stereo. So you had a matrix track with left, center, right, and mono surround, and it was based on the original mono mix and basically just beefed it up, but without being able to do legitimate comparisons between the two, and with it being a Lucasfilm title and every sound mix usually having a tweak or a change or a missing line of dialogue or something like that, there are quite possibly some little tweaks and differences, because the history of certain people going in and making tweaks and trying to improve things all the time has always been a thing. It's even, you know, is even on THX, you know, it's not a new thing. George Lucas didn't just wake up one day and decide, oh, I have to change everything. This is a long-standing thing, and it goes hand in hand with what I mentioned before about certain people's desires to rewrite their own and also their company history all the time. And that's not a good thing, guys. So the Dolby Stereo 1978 remix of American Graffiti was, again, basically a technically improved, beefed up version of the original mono mix. It was supervised by Walter Murch and kept his concept of worldized sound design. This is basically the track that has shown up on all versions of the film since and all the physical media releases. However, not all of them have had the greatest fidelity, and some apply EQ and noise reduction and things like that. So none of them have sounded ever quite that good, to be honest. And if you didn't know about matrixing, you would think it's just flat stereo because you have to manually decode it back out. But even listened to in just plain stereo, and even though it's not the best presentation of this 1978 stereo remix, it's still a brilliant piece of audio design, and it still sounds great to this day for the constraints in which the film was made and by really giving you the sonic character of the world of the film. If you're looking for the best sounding version of the 1978 stereo remix, basically you have to go back to older releases to get versions that are less manipulated. The 1996 Laserdisc, which I have behind me, it sounds better than the Signature Collection and the DVD and the Blu-ray, which all sound like they're slightly tweaked versions of this, but this also could sound better. And over on the Blu-ray blog, which is a great friend of this channel, they've done a comparison with some other releases, and their findings indicate that the 1992 Japanese Laserdisc, which is probably based off the Universal VHS master, I would think, that version has a slightly better version of the 78 stereo than the 96 LD. The only problem is that's a Japanese import with hard-coded subtitles, and it's also pan and scanned. See how fun this stuff is? So a version of the 78 stereo remix lasted all the way through and including the Blu-ray release. And again, the DVD and Blu-ray sound like slightly EQ'd and lesser sounding versions of the 1996 Laserdisc, but in spite of that, the DVD and Blu-ray still sound okay, and at least it's a version of the original sound design. So here on this 5.1 remix for the 4K master, what they decided to do was redo all the Foley effects, have a lot of brand new sound effects throughout, which stick out like a sore thumb and don't match, but then they also messed with the balance of the track and tried to really focus on the dialogue and make that more audible over everything else. So they basically took Walter Murch's intricately worldized sound design and ripped it out, tore it apart, and threw it in the trash. So what you have here is a completely redesigned sound field where the dialogue is more prominent and is thus louder and easier to hear, but it's at the expense of everything else. Most crucially, the music has been altered in terms of the overall mix levels. It now sounds frequently dulled and lifeless, and there also seems to be points in this new remix track where the atmosphere has holes in it in terms of there's now more space because you're working in a 6-channel multi-channel environment, but the intricate worldized sound concept design that was there in the mono mix and is there in the 1978 stereo remix and matrixed out as well, all of that is gone. Like, you obviously know it's still the same film, and yes, it's still the same dialogue recordings, and yes, they've messed with the music, but you've got brand new effects and all the placements are different, and it no longer feels unified. You no longer are able to just immerse yourself in this world, and that concept of worldizing sound is gone.
I wanted the sound to have that kind of very documentary, realistic feel to it. So we took the records and we re-recorded them in situations where streets, gyms, between buildings, and moved the speakers around when we were re-recording it. So it sounded a lot like what it would sound like if the music was coming from a passing car to create that reality.
So that was how we eventually came up with the technique of worldizing the music, of plunging it into the world acoustically, into which it apparently was when you looked at the image. Where we would have put some tension music, we just simply didn't have any money to pay for that. It was all going to these songs.
And then on top of it, because I had music completely through the movie, and the music was treated more like a sound effect than it was like traditional score, I used the absence of music and sound effects to create the drama, which normally what you do is you'd use the music to create the drama and the sound effects to create the realism. I used the music to create the realism and the sound effects to create the drama.
So like the picture, the audio is a painful, pitiful shadow of its former self. And since this film was such a sonic breakthrough, this is perhaps even worse than the picture treatment. There should be at least some version of the original audio present here, even if they just took the Blu-ray audio and rolled it over, and so we had the slightly doled, re-EQ'd version of the 1978 stereo remix. If it was the same track that was on the Blu-ray, at least that would have some better option to switch to. I will say that, thankfully, this remix, in terms of the new Foley and stuff, it doesn't go as crazy as it could. It's not 7.1 or Atmos again, so thank goodness for that. It's possible because it's 5.1, this was done a while ago and it's just been sitting on a shelf. That's also entirely possible. So, in fact, the audio remix could be worse, and it does retain some of Murch's original design work. And if you compare this with just the Blu-ray track, for example, and you switch back and forth, you can see where they didn't mess with things or where they just pasted stuff on top. But really the major issues with the audio here are the really just the screwing up of the balance between dialogue, music, and effects, messing up the worldizing sound effect that Murch strove for, and trying to make the dialogue more prominent over anything, and dialing out the music of American Graffiti. I mean, who thinks of that? It's only one of the most iconic things about the entire film that everyone remembers and led to a rebirth and resurgence of that era's hits. But you know, that's not important, is it? So ultimately, just like the picture, the audio of this release is completely lifeless and a shadow of its former self, and really terrible for the history of sound breakthroughs in the cinematic medium, because it is impossible on this release to appreciate Walter Murch's pioneering work on American Graffiti. But there's also a 2.0 track on here, and it's a little bit perplexing. You might think it's just a fold down of this 5.1 remix, as is commonly done nowadays. Or you might think it's just the track from the Blu-ray, because Universal has been pretty decent in their catalog reissues of the past couple years of including some form of original audio, usually just the track from the previous release rolled over. However, they seem to not be doing that as much now, so it's very hit or miss, just like the terrible audio situation on the UHD of Duel, which is frankly unwatchable because it only has a remix of an already bad remix with changes, and even worse brand new Foley that sticks out even worse than the remix of American Graffiti. But no reviews mentioned that problem. This is my life. What is my life? So when you switch over to this 2.0 track, it's kind of perplexing because in some parts it might seem like the same audio as the Blu-ray, but then others clearly have the new effects of the 5.1. So I think what they did here was make a fold down of the new 5.1 remix, but it's been mixed and EQ'd a little differently, I guess, because it's stereo now, but it's also matrix still, so you can matrix it out and have rear and center information. So I guess it's sort of like a hybrid because of the way it's been handled. So it's kind of between the 2.0 of the Blu-ray of the 78 remix and the horrible, awful new 5.1 remix. So this is a thing for some reason, and at the very least, there should have been a carrying over of the Blu-ray audio as some sort of original option. It's possible that somebody thought they were just grabbing the Blu-ray track and put this on here by mistake, or didn't realize this was a fold down or whatever this track is. But I think that might be the reason why so many people have been a little bit perplexed by this track and trying to figure out what it is. Some people thought it was merely the Blu-ray 2.0 carried over. Some people thought it was the new remix. And I think the answer is kind of in between, because it's like a weird fold down that's also mixed a little differently. So yeah, I don't even know exactly what this 2.0 option is, to be fair, and I did check back with it a number of times and I'm still not entirely sure, but I can tell you it's certainly not the original track either. So Yeah, I have no clue what this alternate audio is actually, but it does seem to be a fold down of the 5.1. It has the new effects as well, but it's just been mixed and handled differently. So again, there is no original audio option here. And now let's look at the packaging and overall design of this particular release. This is done as a standard universal UHD. It does have a slipcover for this first pressing, and does at least give us a version of the iconic original poster artwork. It looks pretty solid, but it also looks like no real effort went into this, other than adding that it's the 50th anniversary edition. They should have just called it the 50th anniversary desecration of American Graffiti, because that's exactly what this is. There is a gloss on this slipcover, so at least they put polish on this turd, but, you know, at least it has a slipcover if you like those things. This is really the only sort of premium element of this release, if you want to even call a slipcover a premium element. So again, at least we got original artwork, but otherwise this is just a standard looking universal slipcover for a standard release, and that's it. This blurb about the UHD format and purchasing a 4K title has never been more false when printed on any release. I mean, just look at that. This is not sharper than the old crappy Blu-ray, and this certainly does not have brighter, deeper, more lifelike color than the old crappy Blu-ray. In fact, this is softer than full HD, and the HDR makes this duller, flatter, and less lifelike color than the old piece of junk crap Blu-ray. Then we have the case itself, which is exactly the same with the original artwork, the same generic looking rear cover, and then you open to find the discs inside. The UHD has a new label with the poster artwork, and then we have the original Blu-ray with the vinyl record cover label attempt idea. So this is the exact same Blu-ray, and so most of us already have this, but if you don't have that, at least thankfully that's included here. So you can purchase this monstrosity and get the actual better copy of the film on the much older and very inferior transfer that is still somehow better than this monstrosity. And you can make the comparisons for yourself. And it's quite painful. In terms of the extras and supplements, if you have the Blu-ray, you have all of them. They did actually port them over to the UHD, surprisingly. Most releases, if they bundled the old Blu-ray, they won't even bother putting the extras on the UHD as well. They just, make you put in the Blu-ray disc. But Universal's been doing this for a while. They put all the old legacy extras on the UHD. Usually, like most modern releases, these are all old standard def extras, and they're looking really ropey, upscaled to 4K now, and also have not been converted or retransferred from the standard def sources. So usually they still look inferior to the original versions on DVD or Blu-ray. And with the American Graffiti ones, it goes all the way back to Laserdisc, because Universal never likes to upgrade their Laserdisc extras. So for American Graffiti and Jaws, for example, the bulk of the extras are still originally from the Laserdisc era, and some have never been updated at all. Here we do have the all-important Laserdisc documentary, which is feature-length, very extensive, and a must-watch if you've never seen it. It's one of the great making-of film documentaries. But the major draws of the Blu-ray and also the UHD, because they're ported over, is there's a partial George Lucas commentary. It was a video commentary on the Blu-ray, but it's an audio one on the UHD. And then the actor tests that were done as improv tests, which are priceless. They are upgraded a little bit on the Blu-ray, so on the Blu-ray and the UHD, they do look like they are of HD quality, as opposed to the older standard def presentations of some of this footage. So again, the bulk of the extras are the original Signature Collection Laserdisc extras, and then we get the Lucas commentary pieces and the all-important actor test footage. So that's right, a 50th anniversary edition with no new extras and a desecration of the film's picture and sound. That is the American Graffiti UHD, and again, if you have the Blu-ray, you already have all the extras. So there is no reason to purchase this monstrosity unless you're like me and you're just morbidly curious and you're thinking, there's no way it could be as bad as all the stuff I've seen. It's worse. Believe me, it's worse. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that personally, for me, I think this is the worst 4K catalog title release since Terminator 2. And in terms of the DNR application of the visuals, because the green structure of Techniscope was so intrinsic to the actual film itself, it's really worse on an artistic level. And then add in the desecration of the film's iconic and real breakthrough in sound design, and there's no new extras. I mean, there's no point to any of this. They should have just kept not paying attention to American Graffiti. It would have been better had Universal been able to handle this themselves without Lucasfilm. I think Universal is probably, at least the more modern Universal releases where they turned around their catalog game and really started presenting their newer masters and restorations quite well, and licensing out to boutique labels as well. This would be a title that I think they'd be ashamed of, but they can't admit it, and they don't really want to admit it because then they'd look bad, but they already look bad for releasing this monstrosity. This is also being shown as 4K DCPs theatrically at art houses. I had someone I know, a friend who works at an art house, actually asked me why American Graffiti suddenly looks so bad and what were all these artifacts on the screen. Because if you think it looks bad watching it at home on this UHD on a, say, 65-inch OLED screen or maybe even bigger, imagine seeing this projected theatrically, especially seeing it projected in 4K theatrically on a large theater screen. Because trust me, it's even worse. And this person is somebody, we talk about film stuff and technical stuff, but he's not as much of a technical person as I am. I admit I'm a nerd for this stuff, if you couldn't tell. Even when they were testing it, when they got the DCP in, he couldn't believe what was going on and started taking pictures with his phone of these big artifacts and things on the screen, because at first they thought something was wrong with their 4K projection equipment, or that the DCP wasn't mounted right. Something technically was wrong. No, that's how bad this is. And if you do see this theatrically projected from a 4K DCP, oh boy, I don't know what sort of treatment you're in for, but it's not going to be pretty. And that leads me into my final point, because this is now how the film is stuck. And they're going to essentially make this the de facto version of record. This is the version that is in print. This is the version that's on streaming services. This is the version that's going to be broadcast. And this is the version that plays in theaters, whether it's a repertory theater or a first-run theater. If they book American Graffiti, they're going to get this 4K master as a DCP. This is now the version of record, and it's a desecration of the original film. And for all of the argument about a director needing to be able to go in and change the film he or she made in exactly the way that they want at that point in time, that's fine and dandy for an artistic argument, but it doesn't mean you can change the historical record. The original film should be preserved and made available to the public as a matter of historical record. And there's a history of Lucasfilm trying to do that. They've even tried to get the Star Wars films removed from the Library of Congress and the National Film Registry. And if you try to research the Library of Congress's holding, you'll find that they have a lot of special edition materials, but not so much original materials. So in essence, what I'm saying is, the original iterations of American Graffiti are being buried, and this desecration is the only thing that exists, and it's the only thing people will see, and it's the only thing that people will see the film as for the first time. So people seeing American Graffiti from 2023 onwards will only see this 4K master and think that this is how the film has always been. It's an attempt to alter the historical record. And digital changes are one thing, but to try and change the actual manner of which a film was made by altering the picture and sound to such a degree that you're essentially trying to change the nature of the way the film was actually made and produced is not an artistic change. That's a whole other realm. So I think we have left the artistic argument of a director needs to be able to go and do whatever they feel like is appropriate at that particular time, even if they may change their mind 5 minutes later. So I'm really tired of that argument. But here is a case where someone has gone in and tried to change the actual format of how the film was made, the format of the film itself, as if it was something that had been shot digitally only a couple years ago. So we're not in an artistic argument here. We're in a
people keep making stupid and boneheaded decisions and are trying to alter the historical record and have actually desecrated a work of art, and it just so happens to be their own work of art. And this is an interesting sort of conundrum that Lucas himself has questioned, and some of the quotes I put at the opening of this do show that. Those are direct Lucas quotes, and you can even see there that, you know, it's sort of an unwinnable argument that nobody quite knows how to understand. Ultimately, do not purchase this UHD. Do not view this UHD. There is no point to it unless you're morbidly curious, or if you did not own a copy of the Blu-ray, because that Blu-ray disc is bundled here, and this release is quite inexpensive. It's usually under $20. You can pick this up and compare for yourself and see the monstrosity that is the desecration of American Graffiti on this so-called 50th anniversary 4K master. And I would not advise anyone to look at this UHD again outside of morbid curiosity, because just switching over to the really terrible, not very good old Blu-ray is such a relief after the horrors of looking at this UHD that I think that will convince anyone. Again, this is a scenario just like Terminator 2, where the best option is an old Blu-ray with a lot of problems based on an older master, but at least it's better than the 4K master. And if you want a version without any digital alterations whatsoever, you have to go back quite a ways. The last time you could get a copy of the film without any digital changes was this 1996 Laserdisc pressing, and this was the first major letterbox release. So this is basically the old standard def master in a widescreen aspect ratio with a PCM version of the 1978 Dolby Stereo remix of the film, but without the opening title shot being changed. So this was the last release of the film on physical media to not have any digital tweaks. This is a very inexpensive disc, and if you have a Laserdisc player, which we seem to have to keep going primarily for George Lucas films among many others, I would definitely recommend picking up a copy of this and having this edition on your shelf. Plus, as original art, the jacket looks nice, but again, this is the last time the film was released on physical media without any digital changes, and at least has a widescreen aspect ratio. Again, the 1978 stereo does sound better on this than it does on DVD and Blu-ray, which basically tweak this audio version a little bit, but again, even this doesn't sound as good as it could, and the best iteration that I'm currently aware of is the 1992 or so Japanese Laserdisc import. Ultimately, for American Graffiti, I think you need to have a copy of the Blu-ray in your collections, and then maybe supplement that with one of the Laserdiscs if you desire. Avoid the UHD at all costs unless you're morbidly curious. It is absolutely atrocious in every way, shape, or form, and should not have been released in this way. It is just an absolute insult to the legacy of the film, and no film should be treated this way. Ultimately, this will have to be another Lucasfilm title that apparently fans themselves will have to save, in the manner that the Star Wars fan base has worked tirelessly for decades now to try and do, due to people making really stupid decisions and thinking they can alter the historical record and also alter artworks to the point of no longer resembling themselves anymore, and thinking that people shouldn't be allowed to care about these things. There is no good physical media release that I'm entirely happy with. There is no physical media release or any release version of the original theatrical version of the film with the original mono mix, and that's really ridiculous now 50 years on that you can't see or hear the film properly in any way, shape, or form without severe compromises, and those compromises are only on older releases. This new 4K master is just plain ungodly and is appalling and should not have been released. It's just, there is no positive here, and everyone involved should be ashamed, and it is the desecration of a classic American film. If there is any positive to this, at least the Blu-ray is solid, if really crummy, and people can just watch that or watch previous physical media releases and have at least a decent version of the film. At least American Graffiti has not been manipulated as much as Star Wars or THX has, and at least the film is available on prior releases in something approximating its original release form with a version of original audio, because poor THX 1138 is just apparently doomed, and the only way you can see that masterpiece in anything like its original intended form is the 1991 Warner Brothers letterbox Laserdisc, which already was not a super great transfer for Laserdisc, so
Unfortunately, THX 1138 is screwed, and at least American Graffiti does have some passable releases, but the best we have is unfortunately the Blu-ray, and the film really needs an archival restoration and release from somebody else, anybody else at this point. It's sad that we're here in this situation now with American Graffiti, because it was the one Lucasfilm title that hadn't gotten royally ruined, essentially, and now that's finally happened. It's just not as catastrophic in terms of changes as other Lucasfilm titles, but the work that has been done is just... It's heartbreaking, because it does really affect the power and the atmosphere of this classic film, and that for a film that's all about heart and atmosphere and that low budget documentary style ethos, that just hurts even more. I think anyone should have questioned what the heck they were doing and not performed this work, because it is film desecration, not film restoration. So in closing, I hate to be so negative, but this does call for it. This is one of the worst physical media releases of all time. This is one of the worst masters ever made in the video realm. This is one of the worst 4K masters there is, and is one of the worst titles since T2 in the 4K realm. There is no positive to this release. The picture is atrocious, the sound is terrible, and it really does not have anything to do with the original release version of the film, and is just heartbreaking and painful to experience. So avoid this at all costs. Just pick up the Blu-ray if you don't have a copy of the film, or if you never picked up the Blu-ray, it's very cheap. Or if you decide you're that morbidly curious, you can pick up this terrible UHD, and it comes bundled with the old Blu-ray, and you can be able to see for yourself that even a horrible looking old Blu-ray is better than this 4K master monstrosity, really. So as always, I hope my babblings about classic films and the never-ending saga of Lucasfilm titles being under endless revisionism has been at least somewhat fun and informative. I do hate to be so negative, but quite frankly, this is just ridiculous, and people need to actually see this stuff for themselves and be made more aware of this. So, as always, please do keep supporting studios and boutique labels wherever possible by buying films on disc. Just don't support this American Graffiti UHD release unless you're morbidly curious about how bad this 4K transfer can be, and trust me, it's worse than you'd ever think. This is one of the worst catalog releases in a really long time. This is the desecration of a film and picture and sound. It's unbelievable what they thought they could do to this film, and they thought they could get away with. So just be forewarned. It is ungodly. So on that unfortunate note, please do keep supporting other films and other releases by studios and boutique labels that actually care about proper presentation, film preservation, and preserving our cinematic heritage and artworks for all people throughout the rest of history, unlike the endless Lucasfilm revisionism that has now been applied to American Graffiti here in this absolutely horrid 4K master. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. You know, George Lucas was quoted many years ago as saying he so despised and hated the Star Wars Holiday Special that for every random VHS copy or any copy of the Holiday Special that appeared, he wanted to take a hammer to it himself and destroy every copy. Well, I have a hammer here, and I know exactly what I want to do with my hammer. I think I could really make this into a special edition.